Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Lock and Load 2013 Iron Gauntlet Finals Qualifier match. I'm Will Schick, Director of Business Development for Privateer Press, and I'm here with DC David Carl, Development Manager for Privateer Press. DC, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. We've had a pretty exciting weekend of events and open play and Iron Arena. People are having a great time here at Lock and Load, but they are definitely all set to see this finals matchup for the Iron Gauntlet.
That's right, and we've got two exceptional competitors going on today. We have Brandon Kading, who took a Fiora Protector of the Flame list and a Callous Wrath of Everblight list all the way through our stiff competition this weekend to get into the final qualifying match.
And he is playing against Keith Christensen. Keith was playing two very different factions with Major Victoria Haley and Lich Lord Asphyxious. Keith chose to play Lich Lord Asphyxious, as you can see here on the screen, for this finals matchup.
And whether Brandon had a stroke of good luck or just some insight into what Keith was going to pick, he wound up picking Callous Wrath of Everblight. That eyeless sight is definitely going to come in handy against Keith's Major Bane list.
Interesting that Keith has a lot of fire whichever direction, Brandon has a lot of fire whichever direction he chose to go during the day today.
That's true. Between Fiora's ability to set things on fire with her Bond Adjudicator or 3 Ravagors in the Callous list, there's going to be no end of things getting burned down to ash.
Here we see both players beginning the setup for the game. This does occur on their time during the Iron Gauntlet format. Brandon's getting close to being completed with his deployment before Keith begins.
So we have Callous Wrath of Everblight, 3 Ravagors, a full unit of Legionnaires led by Farabor and the Standard Bearer, a full unit of Hex Hunters, however, without the unit attachment, 2 Shepherds, a Spawning Vessel that is full up, as well as a Succubus. And instead of the Swamp Gobbers in the initial list, he actually swapped out those for a Spell Martyr from his Specialist list, which is an interesting choice. And we'll see what that model brings to the table for him. But against a non-range heavy list like Keith's Crick's list, that is probably the right choice for him.
And Keith is now deploying his models. Along with Lich Lord Asphyxious, he has a Night Wretch, a Defiler, 2 Arc Nodes to get his spells wherever he needs them. He's also got 10 Bane Knights, 10 Bane Thralls with the Officer and Standard. Minimum unit, 6 Bile Thralls. Very deadly, however, if they get near their targets. 10 Blood Witches with the Blood Witch Hag, Bane Lord Tartarus, Darag Wraith, Saxon Auric, and a Pistol Wraith. Keith had Cankerworm and the Wither Shadow Combine in his Specialist list, but did not choose to use any of his Specialists during this final match.
You know, one of the things the players were actually talking about and confirming with each other before the game began was the Ravagors and how they would stack up against those Bile Thralls. Thanks to the immunity corrosion on the Bile Thralls and the corrosive fire of the Ravagor, it's going to be an interesting matchup, and that may give Keith a slight edge in making sure those Bile Thralls get where they need to go to pull off one of those massive purges.
With so few other ranged attacks, especially of the non-elemental variety, that will be the case.
So, which scenario do we have for our competitors today, DC?
They are playing the Into the Breach scenario. In this scenario, as you can see on the board there is a large circular zone and also a flag. Yes, and also a flag.
Yep, there is a flag on that screen. Now, Into the Breach offers some interesting choices for players with 2 different styles of scoring, whether on the flag or in the zone.
For players who are able to control that zone, having models there without any opposing models, under certain requirements, of course, they're able to score 1 control point per turn, so up to 2 per round if they can keep it through their opponent's turn. And they're also able to score 2 points if they can dominate that zone, still keeping everyone else out, but then having your Warlock or Warcaster himself right there in the zone. When it comes to the flag, it can only be dominated in this scenario. Nothing for controlling the flag, but if your Warcaster or Warlock dominates the flag, that also is worth 1 control point. So a number of different ways to score and a number of different ways to add up to the total number of control points that you need to win, which is 5 control points.
You know, overall, with looking at the two lists that our competitors have brought to the table, I think we are in for one bloody and exceptionally exciting match. We've got tons of infantry on the table on both sides. We've got a lot of AoEs on the Callus side to try to deal with that, with all those Bane Thralls and other models that are going to be coming his way. It's going to be, in my opinion, pretty hard for each player to probably score. So it's going to be interesting to see whether they go for the Dominate on the flag, if they go for the Assassin run, and what's going on. Keith has just finished deploying and has hit the clock, and it looks like we are off to the races with this first Iron Gauntlet Qualifiers Finals. Brandon kicks things off, working to get his models on that hill. Callus advances up onto the hill. We then have a run next.
And I believe that Ignites is the Ignite spell there that Callus cast on the
Blighted Legionnaires, it looks like to me. Yep. And the Legionnaires have declared a run order and are cruising up the line, keeping their tight formation with no real AoEs to be too concerned about, probably in that first round. Though Asphyxious does have Death Knell, it's unlikely that Brandon is really taking that into consideration or concern at this point.
Yeah, and it's also nice to keep that defensive line bonus and have +2 armor.
Always a good thing. But like we always like to talk about, it is always a challenge when you're facing a heavy AoE list, which Brandon has luckily skated by on with this list. So overall, smart move. The Ravagore advances up into the forest as well, I believe on a run to take it closer to the zone.
With this particular layout of the terrain, Eyeless Sight and Pathfinder are going to be helpful, but not really critical on those Ravagores. I'm sure in some of his matchups today, Brandon's really been able to take advantage of those abilities on those trio of heavy war beasts.
So we have the Hex Hunters running up into position to screen the Ravagore on the hill that ran as well, and get ready to probably try to pull off some Battle Wizard shenanigans with their Exceptional Mat boosted by Dark Guidance from Callus. I expect to see those Hex Hunters do some decent amount of work against the Crix list, provided that they can avoid the Alpha Strike from the Bane Knights that they're squaring off against.
Well, yeah, they do have superior speed, but they do not have reach, so it's really going to be a maneuvering game. Noticing, of course, that the Hex Hunters do not have defensive line, so they are spread out all over, keeping some nice open formation there so that any sort of AoEs or even a Biothrall Purge isn't going to catch everybody in. I would expect to see Brandon continuing to use that type of formation throughout the game with that unit until they engage.
The Ravagore, the last Ravagore, runs to get on the hill with the spawning vessel advancing behind, but not making attacks on the unit, so no self-sacrificing just yet to get those corpse tokens. Last but not least, the Succubus advances up to behind Callus, and Brandon passes the turn over to Keith. Overall, a pretty standard turn, I would say, on the Brandon side, with everything moving up to try to contest those zones or threaten the zones, and forcing Keith to react appropriately and hopefully bring his army within range of those Eyeless Sight Ravagores with some nice Dragon's Fire Breath.
Here we see Keith running his Bane Knights. They do not have Pathfinder per se, but they do have Ghostly, which allows them to get through that wooded area of the board without any difficulty. Also allows them to ignore free strikes, which can occasionally be very handy.
It's interesting to note that both players so far have positioned their Warlocks or Warcaster not near the flag, so it seems like that flag is not going to be much of a concern for either player, at least in this initial match. It is only worth 1 point, and you do have to dominate, so it's probably not the juiciest of targets. However, with the amount of models on the board, and it'll be interesting to see if they change tactics later on, depending on how the flank goes for them.
Well, the interesting thing with the flag is that it is a smaller zone, therefore easier to dominate than to dominate the larger zone that you see there. But it is also worth less, so I'm not too surprised to see both of these top-tier players making the choice to go for the higher point objective first.
Well, and certainly both players want to keep their Warlock or Warcaster safe. They don't want to overcommit to begin with. Speed is on really both sides, however, with the middle position that they're each kind of taking at the moment. If the situation favors them, I expect that we may see a run in order to dominate and score a point. But based on the list that each of these competitors is bringing, I really feel like assassination is the name of the game for both.
At the same time, both can play quite the attrition game. Both feats that we have involved in this matchup are very attrition-oriented. So while assassination is a great way to win immediately, playing that attrition game better than your opponent also could be a viable path to victory here.
Curious to note that Brandon does not have any incubi in his list ordinarily. The only incubi he's going to be able to pull out are during that feat turn. One of the interesting things that our players were discussing before the match began, was the fact that Brandon only has 10 incubi models with him. And his comment was simply that he's never actually had a chance to have more than 10 on the table at any time. So it'll be funny to see if that prediction remains to be true, or if this is going to prove to be the exception of the rule and he's going to find himself wishing he had a few more to put on the table.
Well, barring a truly amazing Biothrall purge, I don't anticipate that we'll see all that many models dying during the feat turn before other incubi get destroyed. We see here the Blood Witch unit with the unit attachment Blood Hag. They have all run as well, getting into position for future turns.
Judge Andrew Hartland has called for a base check for Darg's Wraith movement, and it's a good thing he did. That Darg Wraith did not have enough room to clear the space that Keith was trying to move him through. So instead of moving further on, Keith declares a death ride, which allows all of his models to move 1 inch forward within Darg Wraith's command range.
And that will just be the undead. You can expect those Blood Witches to stay right where they are, but the undead models in that command area are going to be taking a little jog.
Really rough for him in that case, the fact that he could not fit Darg Wraith's base through the Blood Witches that were blocking his way, because he was unable to catch many of the Bane Thralls in the forest. So a little bit of an unfortunate turn of events. Light Cab move away to keep Darg Wraith out of the range of those Ravagors for next turn.
Being unable to move the Bane Thrall unit on the hill there was definitely a disadvantage for Keith, but in a lot of ways I'd call it an advantage for us that we have such great judges paying attention, keeping the game as clean and clear as it can possibly be, and I think that we'll be seeing more of that use of some of these proxy bases, possibly some line of sight checks with a laser, just to make sure that at the top levels of competition that everything is absolutely flawless in terms of good, clean, fair gameplay. Here the Biothralls have now run into position as well.
In a very interesting position as well. It's kind of a conga line of Biothralls there. Keith making sure that he's only going to ever sacrifice 1 at most, if best, against Brandon's retaliatory strikes. So a fun little line of acid purging death on the way.
We also saw the Pistol Wraith run straight through other models since it has Incorporeal. No proxy base is needed there to find out if he can fit. And Lich Lord Asphyxious has moved up to slightly on the hill.
Yeah, and that Pistol Wraith certainly doesn't have much to fear on that side of the board, because the Hex Hunters, who are going to be the primary way to deal with that Pistol Wraith, are on the opposite side.
Keith has just cast Hellbound on Lich Lord Asphyxious, being able to provide some effective rough terrain in the area around his base.
Keith considering his final moves here. Taking a moment to pause and think about what he wants to do with Tartarus. Tartarus, he decides to run into a new position to get him closer to those Bane Thralls. Keith admits to Brandon that he had put Tartarus in an inopportune spot in deployment because he was afraid of losing him too early. So definitely fearing the eyeless sight on the other side of the table that Brandon is bringing. Keith passes the turn to Brandon. Brandon begins by upkeeping Ignite on the Swordsman.
Stealth is definitely a defense that players can begin to rely on, and Legion, as we know, is famous for getting around that with their eyeless sight.
First Ravagor takes a shot, boosts the attack roll to hit, and then boosts damage roll. Takes a healthy chunk out of the Bonejack on the hill, however, does not manage to cripple the Arc Node, which is really what he was going for. POW 8 blast damage on the
Bane Thrall.
Bane Thrall next to the Death Ripper or Night Wretch. I'm not sure which one that is. Manages to remove one and sets both of them on fire thanks to the Ravagor's Animus, which he used earlier. Scalar template goes down, which may crimp a little bit of Keith's movement potential there, but with no real rough terrain except for that hill, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference in terms of the movement options.
Well, that all depends on where those Legionnaires end up. If the Bane Thralls really want to charge the Legionnaires, having to go around that Scather Cloud could make a big difference.
After a check of the AoE zone, they actually found out that one of the Bane Thralls that they thought was in was out. Luckily, the damage roll was insufficient to kill the Bane Thrall, so they simply removed the fire token, and we're back to having everything great. Quick run, looks like, from the Hex Hunters. Oh, charge order to the Hex Hunters to go engage that front Bile Thrall. Checking measurements now to see if the second Hex Hunter can engage its charge target. It's going to be just shy, it looks like, to reaching. Our judge is watching intently as the rest of the moves are taken up. These are all going to be runs lacking proper charge targets, so Brandon's just trying to move into a better position. And he's going to have to be careful about his positioning because he's got a long line of Bile Thralls that may or may not be able to get into Purge depending on what happens with that first and only successful charged Hex Hunter.
Well, while those first two Hex Hunters might be a lost cause at this point, Brandon's positioning means that the rest of the unit is unlikely to be affected by Bile Thralls or even be in charge range of those Bane Knights.
Successful charge attack allows Battle Wizard to trigger, and the Hex Hunter immediately blasts another Bile Thrall with a Hex Bolt. Brandon asks for confirmation on where the Blood Witch is, or the Blood Hag, excuse me, for the Styx's Blood Witches. Keith points out that she is pretty safely ensconced in that unit.
Now, that Bile Thrall that was hit by the Hex Bolt couldn't make a special attack anyway, so no purge there.
It's true, although once you hit something with a POW 13, Bile Thralls don't typically stand up to that at all or ever.
Yeah, needing to roll 1 or better on 2 dice is pretty easy on most situations.
I definitely don't have to have your math skills to know that for sure. So second Ravagore advances up, takes a shot, does actually connect, looks like 3 of the Blood Witches in its AoE.
Another Scather goes down, providing another area of 1 auto point of damage right in front of the Bile Thrall conga line.
And 2 more Blood Witches as well as the main target, which I believe was the Hag. At this point, are eliminated. And if he did actually get the Hag like I think he did, that is a huge benefit to him, denying Keith the use of that incorporeal once per game ability.
Yeah, it definitely makes a big difference to Keith's strategy if he lost the use of that mini feat, as some people tend to call once per game abilities. And our current understanding is that the Blood Hag was too far back and Brandon did not shoot her. That could be mistaken because we're watching this game like you guys are, but it looks like she's still there.
Brandon continues to unleash Ravagore. Unleash Ravagore shots. And the Blood Hag was too far back for Brandon to be able to target. So she is safe. So they still have their ability to go incorporeal, which I would expect Keith to probably be using next turn. However, again, those Hex Hunters may be the ace in the hole that Brandon needs to kind of circumvent that ability. Thanks to their Hex Bolts, they can deal successfully with incorporeal models.
Well, and not only the Hex Bolts, but also their Hex Razors. With Battle Wizard, each Hex Hunter has the potential to kill 2 incorporeal models in a turn. A Hex Razor on a charge and then a Hex Bolt afterwards.
And with a mat of 7, excuse me, and a magic ability of 6, there's decent chance for that actually to happen overall. Not even factoring in Dark Guidance.
Absolutely. Dark Guidance is a game changer when it comes to the accuracy of your melee attacks. I'm not sure, however, if Brandon wants to get Callus that far forward at this point in the game.
So next up, after the 3rd Ravagore activated, he's now moving up his spawning vessel, along with its acolytes, to hopefully capture some or some corpse tokens this next turn, and be able to generate some lesser war beasts for Callus to add to his battle group. And I do have to agree with you, the game that we're seeing these Brandon play right now is heavy attrition based. He's being very careful about where he's putting his models. The Legionnaires are advancing up to contest that zone. Now he's using one of our favorite maneuvers in the office, the favorite triangle maneuver, where you keep 3 together so that you have to eliminate 2 models before you can crack through that defensive line. Likely hoping to trigger Vengeance at this point as well for some solid shots next turn. With Ignite, those Legionnaires are definitely able to deal out some decent damage.
Agreed. Just a minute ago also, we saw Brandon checking the melee range on all of those Nisk Grunts in the spawning vessel unit. And what he was really doing there was checking to see whether or not they would be able to use their 1 inch of movement on the carried ability. So using the length of the staff to check if they could carry that spawning vessel further forward on following turns.
Brandon measures a quick control area as he decides if he's going to activate Callus. Chooses not to. Instead, activates a Shepherd and edges right around one of the Alkalites, it looks like. And conditions at this point?
Potentially conditions. Let's see.
Some discussion, some consideration here. A little finger tap. You can always tell when a player is truly lost in thought when you see that finger tap. Always a good moment when some discussion's going on across the table. Both are judges watching intently as the action unfolds in front of them to make sure that no mistakes are made by either player. Our organized play coordinator and volunteer coordinator, William Hungerford, sitting lower, while Andrew Hacksaw 76, to those who know him at the forum, Heartland, is sitting up high. A good dispersion of those guys overall.
See, checking something, possibly with a proxy base here, as Callus is activating now, I believe.
So,
Spell Martyr action.
Activated. And casts what is likely to be Eruption. Unfortunately, was out of range, and the attack deviates over, but does catch 2 Blood Witch and a Hex Hunter. That Hex Hunter that had failed its charge over the wall, it looks like.
And Eruption is one of those very rare spells that, while it is an AoE, it does full damage to everyone in the AoE. And that is a POW 14 to both. They are quite dead. More fire damage, too. We were talking earlier about all of the fire in Brandon's lists with Fiora and Callus and 3 Ravagores, and Eruption marks some more.
Looking across that field now of all those Scather Clouds and the Eruption Cloud that also deals damage to models that move through it, there's a lot of zone control that Brandon is able to bring with this list that's also pretty impressive, and may hamper Keith's attempts to close with him and try to either start capturing and contesting those zones, or play more of the attrition game and eke back some of the casualties that have been inflicted on him this turn.
And that 50mm wooden circle there was not to check a Ravagore for a proxy base or anything, but a marker to remind us all that Brandon has chosen to use Callus's feet. We can expect to see some Incubi popping out here and there during Keith's turn coming up.
Keith is measuring his control area right now, determining what he's going to do as his turn kicks off. Accidentally bumps Asphyxious there with that tall halberd and had to replace him. And like the true sport that he is, Keith did ask Brandon if his replacement was acceptable based on Asphyxious' previous positioning. So a nice show of sportsmanship there from Keith.
I wonder if Keith might slightly be regretting taking Saxon Auric this time around, since large areas of rough terrain are not going to be an issue. But he still does have his weapons.
He does. He does. Saxon Auric can always act as kind of a solo flanking force, get around and snipe a couple people off with either his rifle or against hordes as well. He does have some decent abilities against war beasts.
Absolutely. He also looks like he's doing a good job of advising Asphyxious.
Well, when you're face down with a giant Lich Lord, you often want to give good advice and know when to give advice and when to be scarce when that advice goes awry. So we'll get to see what happens there with those two mismatched pairs.
Well, I've got to agree with you. Those Scather clouds are, or not clouds, those Scather AoEs are definitely a powerful zone control effect in this matchup. Keith seems to be thinking hard about how and where he wants to get his forces forward enough to contest the zones without just throwing them away to the retaliation from Brandon before or after.
And Brandon's maneuvering of those Hex Hunters during his last turn really pulled them basically away from the majority of those Bane Knights, and now they're left staring down an open objective, open flag rather, that they really can't do anything with in this scenario. So they're going to have to reposition, and at speed 5, even with reach, it's going to take probably another turn before they can really start to leverage their potential in this game.
Yeah, and committing the Bane Knights is likely to lose Keith more of them than it saves. Certainly more than the Hex Hunters he could kill on this turn.
Yep. Putting Keith into a difficult position, and certainly Keith is feeling it right now as he stares at that board intently, trying to decide what to do as well.
Keith asks Brandon which models are under the feet. I did not catch his reply, but he is not forced to tell exactly who is or isn't until he wishes to check if an incubus is created.
I mean, I believe based on the prior turn's measurement of control area, nearly his entire force, if not his entire force, is under the effects of Callus's feet.
I believe you're correct.
Keith is checking to make sure that everything is faction. You notice that Brandon pulled off a model from the table. That was actually a Spell Martyr that he channeled through last turn and forgot to remove. So Andrew Hutland caught that and asked him to remove that model. So a good catch there again by the judges. Both players had a good laugh about that as well. So thus far, these two have showed incredible sportsmanship in this early round. There's going to be a lot of thinking, a lot of consideration in this game. You have to wonder at this point, if you're Keith, do you regret not taking your Haley list at this point? What do you think there, DC?
That is a good question. Certainly his Haley list has a bit of a different direction to it, but it's also very attrition-oriented. He's got Gregor Boomhauer and company, who those models are definitely geared for the attrition game. He's got Alexia and the Risen, possibly the most attrition-oriented unit in the entire game of War Machine.
So we have Tartarus advancing up really quick. Keith has seemingly decided on a course of action and cursing the Hex Hunters, and we're going to see those Bane Knights come screaming in to try to do some damage on that unit. So overall, now with the curse, what do you think of the potential? I mean, we talked about before how they were a bit out of position to be able to attack the Hex Hunters and do any meaningful damage without taking severe casualties themselves.
Well, between Curse and then Ghost Walk to ignore free strikes, he's going to get more of them than he would have otherwise, but I still think that he may wind up with an uneven trade here, potentially. But at the same time, it might be worth it. If those Satixis are going to be incorporeal next turn, perhaps killing a Hex Hunter or two more than you would have is worth losing an extra Bane Knight or two.
Especially when you consider Lich Lord Asphyxious' ability to bring them back. I mean, in some ways, Keith does want some of his more powerful models to die so that he can make maximum use of his feet. It's an interesting consideration. And again, now we're seeing the Eruption cloud coming into play here, as Keith is trying to draw a charge lane to his targets without crossing that unboostable POW 14 fire damage roll that he would take for moving through that boiling morass of lava.
Did you catch if that was a successful charge or a failed charge?
I believe
did
it
not
was a
quite hear it.
successful charge.
Okay.
So more consideration now. It makes another charge to the Hex Hunter on the wing. With reach, looks like that is going to be successful as well. So Keith has managed to bring, it looks like, about 3 to 4 Hex Hunters at this point within melee distance of his Bane Knight. So he's factoring in the bonus from Curse to his attack rolls.
Yeah, and most definitely to his charge distances. These Bane Knights, thanks to Tartarus, are screaming across the board. It'll be interesting to see if a Ravagore shoots Tartarus in the face next turn.
It's certainly one of those things that Keith was talking about early on, wanting to try to keep Tartarus safe early in the game to make sure he got maximum use out of it. If that's Tartarus's one contribution to this game, let's hope that it's going to be worth it. You know, those Bane Knights are also really bunched together nicely for a couple of AoEs as well if Brandon decides to go that route.
So the Bane Knights are making several successful attacks here, but as you can see, that has resulted in 4 Incubi being created. One of them has already been destroyed. So 3 Incubus models still on the table, along with a few of the Hex Hunters still making it through the attack.
And the Hex Hunters are fleeing now, which is really unfortunate for Brandon that they failed that command check for massive casualties from the Bane Knights. That certainly lends a lot of survivability to those blood witches.
It does indeed.
Who can now use that once per game ability to go incorporeal from their Hag and move pretty much freely to wherever they want to be able to threaten Brandon on his next turn. So there we go. Blood witches activate and pop their mini feat.
Yeah, important to note that this is not the Warcaster's feat. This is the once per game ability of the Blood Witch Hag.
Keith now considering where he wants to maneuver those Blood Witches. Now that they're incorporeal, they get to ignore models just like that pistol right did for movement. They don't have to worry about free strikes, except from maybe Callus if they go that far, and unlikely that they will.
Yeah, without the Hex Hunter's magical weapons, they can just run right through that whole front line.
Keith was confirming with Brandon that the Legionnaires had not gone Iron Zeal, which is Farabor's once per game ability to give them +4 arm, in addition to defensive line, which can make that unit extremely survivable against just about anything. Incorporeal to declare some charges here. And we see 2 of those Blood Witches going after the front 2 Legionnaires in that triangle, as well as 2 Blood Witches charging one of the Hex Hunters that's actually fleeing right now. Measuring out a run from that back Blood Witch to move up and engage one of the Incubi. Which is a great move on Keith's part because if that Incubi decides to move away to try to engage something that can actually hurt, the free strike is likely to end its life before it can actually make a dramatic effect.
Keith is spreading out pretty far. He's going to have to start thinking a little bit about command range because while the Hag has a better command than some unit commanders do, Crix in general has lower command values than many of the other factions in the game. One of the few units where Crix actually has to worry about command and possibly even fleeing.
He takes some consideration, finishes his runs from the non-charging Blood Witches and begins to roll attack dice. First attack hits and manages to kill a Legionnaire. Chose Death Strike for his weapon ability attack. Now they're considering, now the conversation is which one goes first. So Death Strike still triggers before the Incubi goes on.
Now Death Strike against defensive line Legionnaires is not too likely to take out a model, but if Keith does roll particularly high, it can get the job done.
Second shot misses, as well as the
Death Strike damage
as well as
roll.
the Death Strike
Okay.
damage roll fails. Another miss from a Blood Witch.
And a hit. Taking out that fleeing model, creating an Incubus, and then the other model fails to kill the Incubus.
Interesting to note the fact that with that failure, those Blood Witches are now a bit in trouble because that Incubus has the ability to eliminate them as well, since they are no longer incorporeal after making their attacks. Oh. Does manage to kill the Incubi with
a different model in the unit, it seems.
and that is all of his charge attacks. So
So about half of the unit is now corporeal again, able to be attacked by the mundane weapons throughout Brandon's army. It's interesting that you brought up Iron Zeal earlier, Will, because Brandon has it in this army with his Legionnaires led by Captain Farrelor and his standard. He also had it in his other army, the Temple Flame Guard unit with their officer in standard, the first unit to boast the Iron Zeal once per game ability. So that's something throughout both lists, just like the Fire is.
You know, it's very funny when you compare Brandon's two lists, even though they couldn't be more markedly different. One War Machine, one Hordes, Protectorate, one Legion. There are striking similarities in terms of playstyle between Iron Zeal, all the Fire. I mean, his Fiora list even has Cleansers in it as a min unit. So he definitely has a favorite elemental attack type, and it seems to have worked for him very well over the weekend, as he has gone undefeated to this round.
And with that other list heavily featuring a bonded Judicator, Fiora the Protector of the Flame, giving all of its attacks fire, it almost ends up much like the Ravagors, where it's firing all these AoEs that can set things on fire and have continuous effects, this time fire instead of corrosion on that part of things. But got a lot of that AoE action going on as well.
Asphyxious activates, puts out some Caustic Mist in order to try to protect his frontline troops from retaliation. Caustic Mist, of course, places a 3-inch AoE cloud effect. Models entering or ending their activation in the AoE suffer 1 point of corrosion damage. So he was able to drop it on some of his corporeal Blood Witches and know that they would be safe because they had already activated this turn.
Yeah, and the trio of Caustic Mists is very like a trio of attacks from the Ravagors. One of the big differences is that rather than using up the activations of some heavy war beasts, it uses up 6 of Asphyxious 7 focus.
And Asphyxious, after placing the Caustic Mist, decides that discretion is the better part of valor and retreats or falls back closer to Keith's board edge. So trying to stay as far away as possible from those Eyeless Sight Ravagors in order to not feel Dragonfire again.
Now, Keith must be very, let's say, respectful rather than trepidatious of those Ravagors, because Asphyxious really wants to get up close to the action when he uses his feet. It's awful rare that you'll see a Lich Lord Asphyxious playing that far back on the table prior to feeding.
That's very true. I mean, between Hellbound and some great defensive stats as well as a decent focus stat that he can overboost with, Lich Lord Asphyxious is a frontline caster in most cases, and especially when he wants to pull off that feat.
And if I'm not mistaken, Hellbound was not upkept in this particular game, so Keith is keeping that one focus that you see there next to Asphyxious for armor, rather than the protection that the rough terrain would have provided.
Dark Wraith activates next and advances up. Keith now activating his Bile Thralls. Simple advance from them and just to reposition and hold them off for a later turn. So Vengeance now triggering on Brandon's side as the play passes to him. Has to be careful about those Caustic Mist AoEs, but with reach on their long-bladed swords, not going to have a problem in terms of reaching those guys.
They do only have a mat of 6, so not the highest of the Legion infantry, but still respectable, and I would expect to see some of the Blood Witches taken out by this Vengeance move and attack.
Now, I am not positive, but it looks like Ignite was not upkept on them for this turn, which is an interesting choice. The +2 to their damage rolls really isn't necessary for them to be able to kill those Blood Witches if they can hit, and it's possible that Callus wants that Fury somewhere else. And of course, with the massive bodies on the table, neither player has been able to score any control points so far. So this is definitely a game of attrition and maneuvering for an assassination.
Well, and we have crossed that line where during the first 2 turns of the first player and the first turn of the second player, no control points can be scored anyway. But we now are past that because starting in the second player's second turn, control points can be scored. And as a reminder, it's 1 control point for dominating the flag that you see there on the video by having your Warcaster or Warlock near that flag and no opposing models within 4 inches of it unless they're fleeing or inert or something.
So,
and then also with the zone, it's 1 control point for controlling it with anything you want, 2 control points for dominating it with your Warcaster or Warlock.
and a quick confirmation from Brandon to Keith is that he did upkeep Ignite using the Succubus's ability to upkeep for free. The token is just not next to them at the moment, so that's why there's a little bit of confusion there on our end in terms of if that spell had been upkept or not. It's actually sitting back by Callus where their original position turn 1 was. But both players are aware of it, as well as the judges, and considering the amount of models on the table, having that token there would be a little rough.
Well, and it does sometimes happen that your upkeep spells get left behind a bit by models that activate.
Brandon having some fun, wreaking some retaliation on the Bane Knights that eliminated and several of his Hex Hunters last turn with those Incubi that spawned out thanks to Callus's feat. The first Incubi is able to kill both Bane Knights that it engages with its dual strikes from its claws. So an auspicious start for eking back that attrition roll that Keith managed to wrest away despite all of the things Brandon threw his way to try to slow him down.
Well, and such a convenient model to have out there. The Incubi are not a unit. Brandon does not have to activate them together, but activates each one whenever the opportunity seems most convenient. So that's definitely going to help him a bit. Also, their ability to choose to make 1 stronger attack or 2 weaker attacks, another nice little advantage of the Incubus models.
So Brandon has to replace one of his Ravagors with a stand-in base for the moment as as the Ravagor on the hill's position wasn't quite allowing it to balance properly. Keith jokingly says, I'm going to flip your feet token over because, well, I know you popped your feet. Viewers at home might not yet either, so Keith being very respectful of our watchers across the world and at Lock and Load 2013.
We trust you, viewers, even if Keith doesn't.
So, moving along, they've now removed the token so that there can be no confusion at all according to the judge's wishes. Heartland has taken it to write Ravagor on it so there can be 0 confusion. Hungerford confirms that Heartland is using a dry erase marker, which means that that token will not have that permanently on it. It will be able to get washed off. So a lot of very careful consideration. Heartland offering his autograph to Brandon afterwards, and Brandon admitting that he is a huge Hacksaw fan personally. So Brandon, after quick activations of his Incubi models, one of which decided to walk away to take a free strike in order to give a corpse token to the spawning vessel, is now in careful consideration of where to go next on this turn. And he certainly has a lot to consider. He doesn't have to worry about his feet anymore, but Keith has a lot of models on his right flank right now that are going to be pressing in further and further, and he's going to need a way to manage them as well as mitigate those Bane Knights who managed to break the Hex Hunters last turn.
Yeah, and those Bane Knights are definitely still a threat. Thanks to Vengeance, they'll be moving up closer and potentially attacking before they even get to activate next turn. So definitely a danger there. Hopefully, hopefully for Brandon, he will have the opportunity to kill a few more of those Bane Knights before his turn is over.
And we know now that vengeance is certain because, as we saw earlier, the incubi that was created from a Hex Hunter did eliminate 2 of them. So vengeance is going to happen. Brandon has to be wondering if there's a possibility to take out Tartarus to at least remove the curse danger that Tartarus possesses, in addition to all of Tartarus's other wonderful abilities. So
we see there from this camera angle the undead dead pile that Keith is building up. His Blood Witches are elsewhere because those are not viable targets for Lich Lord Asphyxious feat, but the undead dead certainly are, and I'm sure he's hoping to get Asphyxious closer to the action soon in order to pop that amazing feat and get lots of undead models to go kill some enemies.
boosted shot from a Ravagore manages to destroy the damaged Bonejack on the hill, so a wreck marker gets placed, as does the Scather Cloud, cutting off some of the access for Keith's models next turn.
And Brandon rolled well enough to destroy the Bane Thrall, but it made its tough roll thanks to the Bane Thrall unit attachment. It is now knocked down and on fire, and probably sad.
Well, not that sad, since the Bane Thrall UA allows that Bane Thrall to stand up for free next turn. So he'll still be on fire, and that may or may not be unfortunate for him depending on what happens next. Brandon considering where to go next after that successful Ravagore shot eliminated one of Keith's potential arc nodes. And, you know, you've got to feel happy anytime you can remove a heavy magic user's arc node ability like like Lich Lord Asphyxious, excuse me. That's always a benefit, and it's something that you've got to keep in mind because those things are incredibly fast. They have great maneuverability, and, you know, they can catch you unprepared. So,
Well, even with Lich Lord Asphyxious' great control area, I believe the Night Wretch is currently out of range for arcing any spells. He would have to move one model or the other if he wishes to arc some spells through his second arc node.
second Ravagore activates, spends 1 for its Animus, then fires at a cluster of Bane Knights, excuse me, by the wall. Brandon jokes that he's already triggered Vengeance, so he might as well continue to chip away at that unit because he's got nothing to lose at this point, and I would fully agree with that. If he can eliminate as many models from that unit as possible, that is what he wants. First, the attack hits the first model and kills it easily. Boosted attack or damage rolls on the second 2 models that are caught in the blast also eliminate them as well.
And that appears to be an exceptional place for Brandon to be in terms of that unit. While they still will have an effect next turn with Vengeance moves and attacks, it's not going to be nearly as many models as it was before, and there's a Scather Cloud in the way to keep them from getting to the Ravagores themselves.
Well, now Brandon has moved on and is kind of muttering to himself about his last Ravagore, trying to figure out what to do with that model's activation. Advances forward just slightly, staying on the hill. Activates its Animus by spending 1 to make sure that anything caught in its AoE is going to be set on fire, and takes a shot at the other Bonejack by the hill. Misses, unfortunately. Goes 5 to the 4.
By the forest, that is. They've taken the trees off of it to make it easier for the Bane Knights to move through that piece of terrain, but that is a forest terrain feature.
And actually a pretty beneficial scatter for Brandon there. He's got 2 Scather Clouds now very tightly grouped. It's hard to tell from this angle, but I think he might even be close enough that there is not a 30-millimeter gap for those Bane Knights to move through.
I believe you're correct.
So that is a great deviation roll. Obviously, you probably want to hit your target, but if you're going to miss, that's the way to miss right there.
Keith just placed a few beads to mark which the clouds are that were created by Asphyxious versus the clouds that were created by Ravagores. The areas of effect, not clouds. Sorry, these are not cloud effects, just AoEs.
But the ones with the beads are actually cloud effects, so
right.
You can understand how it's always interesting to keep bookkeeping notes, and the judges especially have to keep this very clear.
So the non-bead ones are Scathers, the bead ones are those corrosive clouds.
Iron Zeal is called on the Legionnaires as Brandon moves to them next.
Seems like a good time.
Hoping to likely have Iron Zeal protect them from either incorporeal free strikes from the Blood Witches, depending on how he decides to activate them next, or other threats that they may have to move through.
Or just retaliation. With Iron Zeal, they're a lot more likely to survive a Blood Witch's attack than without. They are still not too likely to survive a charging Bane Knight, or Bane Thrall or Bane Knight, however. And they're running, not or charging. Did you hear?
I believe that they are. I believe they are running at this point.
Nope,
No,
it is a charge. A few of them have chosen to run, even though they had possible charge targets nearby. But the unit itself received the charge order, allowing the models to charge or run as they decide.
The last triangle of 3 Legionnaires shifts over to block paths of the Ravagore. So Brandon, using his Legionnaires to great effect, and as Legionnaires are trained to do, to defend the more important parts of his army from retaliation by Keith's forces. It'll be interesting, but probably not vital for Brandon to see where his charges against those Blood Witches end up. If he's able to eliminate more models from Keith's army, all the better for him. But at this point, those Legionnaires are really playing the screening game right now.
And I believe maybe it was a run after all. I did not see an attack, but he's now activated a Shepherd.
So Keith is
Checking out the
checking control really quick.
Also interested to know if the last couple of Legionnaires there are outside of control range now and unable to attack. They're certainly spread out to take care of screening the army.
Well, Feralor certainly has a very impressive command stat for most UAs.
That's true.
But it is not obviously infinite, and certainly is something you have to keep in mind at all times when you try to spread things out for screening. But given his central location, I think that he's probably okay, although probably by the barest of margins, I think they're just within.
Well, if Brandon's ranged attack against that Bonejack, where he moved up just under half an inch to get it in range, is any indication, his judge of distances is better than my own. The Defiler Bonejack, that is.
Callus advances forward and dumps some fury, it looks like, and then that completes Brandon's turn. A fairly decent turn, although he's now more in a defensive posture than he was in his initial opening rounds. Again, no control points have been scored by our players with that huge amount of troops all in the zone. No Warcaster or Warlock by the flag for a dominate bonus. We are seeing a straight through and through attrition game.
That poor little knocked down on fire in a Scather Bane Thrall did indeed die. He's now out of the picture. And they've resolved other effects here during the start of the turn up until the Bane Knight Vengeance, which Keith is taking care of now.
I think it's going to be an unfortunate end for that Incubi, who managed to kill 2 of the members of the Bane Knight unit, although we'll see what happens. That will be a hit, and with Weapon Master, no problem to eliminate the Incubi, although that will give another corpse token to the spawning vessel, which I believe brings it up to 3. And Brandon hoots out mission accomplished to Keith, that now he has 3 and is going to be able to pull that lesser war beast of his choice from the pot next turn. And it's important to remember, and Keith is also confirming, that Feralor does give the Legionnaire set defense, which is fantastic against any kind of retaliatory charge from those Bane Knights.
So those Bane Knights are at an effective defense 14 from charges and arm 20 with their defensive line and their Iron Zeal. They also cannot be knocked down or made stationary this turn.
So, charge declared by the Bane Knights. The first one charges an Incubi further back. The second one charges one of those Legionnaires, intentionally not going 3 inches, because to do so would require it to go through that Scather Cloud. The last one charges the Incubi again, with plenty of distance to make it.
I believe it was to avoid the set defense. Because I think he still could have gone farther past the Scather Cloud towards the Incubi and gotten the 3 inches, but a non-charge attack will not trigger the +2 defense.
$20 on the nose from the non-charge attack does not break Iron Zeal.
Got around the set defense to not get around the Iron Zeal.
So there you go. Sometimes the canny play is not always the smartest play. However, trying to hit a defense of 14 with a Bane Knight is no simple feat either.
Unless you curse.
Unless you curse. But we didn't see that this round, so it'll be interesting to see where that curse will be being placed next turn.
Well, and Tartarus is kind of out of the action at this point. He is way over there, back behind Dargwraith on the hill. We could see another Death Ride, potentially.
You know, what started off as a massive amount of troops on both sides is slowly being whittled down in front of our eyes into a much more manageable amount of models on the table. However, there's still plenty of models to come back. Again, we point back to that dead pile, that undead dead pile, as you mentioned before, and that is all fodder for Asphyxius's forthcoming feat at this point. Now, when Keith decides to leverage that is going to be pretty interesting because Asphyxius, as you pointed out, is very far in that backfield.
And those Ravagors are very slowly and very subtly moving a bit closer to Asphyxius. Each turn, they're just a tiny bit closer, and I don't know if Keith is going to be willing to advance Asphyxius into a good feet position with where those Ravagors are. He's not been able so far to really tie them up or take them out, so it's a tough choice to make.
You know, you can see just the intense look of concentration. He's working out the math in his head. He's trying to figure out where is his best play right now. Brandon has done an exceptional job of not only threatening him consistently with those Ravagors, but also of keeping those Ravagors safe. The Bane Knights already have lost their chance to be able to attack a Ravagor thanks to those Legionnaires and the Incubi. Saxon Orc now activating and shifting up. He reconnaissances the blood witches for all that's worth.
Oh, for the one that's behind the wall, I suppose.
Yeah. So now giving them Pathfinder and the ability to not be concerned about that wall. The Blood Witches gain the charge order. The Blood Witch behind the wall, who needs the reconnaissance, charges the Legionnaire on the pair group on the left side for Brandon. Consideration about where else to apply these charge attacks. Blood Witches are going to have a difficult time, I think, getting through the Iron Zeal Legionnaire's armor. And definitely I don't think we'll be seeing any death strikes this time around.
Yeah, that would not have too much of an effect during Iron Zeal. But charging with their Blood Razors could definitely do the trick. As Keith is looking for the right angles and checking melee ranges.
So with the blood lending ability, Gang does help a little bit by bringing their Blood Razors up to a potential power 12. Their horns up to power 10, as long as he can maintain 2 models in melee contact with each opponent. You'll notice that the Statixis that charged across the wall into the Legionnaire does not have a friend with her, so she is going to be hitting at just POW 10s against ARM 20.
Oh, a free strike is able to destroy one Blood Witch.
And then a second.
And then a second Blood Witch, including the leader.
And that occurred because Keith realized that they were not going to be able to make attacks due to it looks like the command range, I would assume.
Well, as long as the Blood Hag is alive, that's the only leader that matters.
So the Blood Hag charges up against another Legionnaire. Set defense is also going to come into play here with the Legionnaires. With only a mat of 6, charging against Def 14 models with ARM 20, I'm not sure.
The Gang ones aren't too bad off. But those that are out there alone, yeah, they might have a tough time hitting and dealing damage.
So overall, the Blood Hag leads off with not an auspicious start, failing to kill her target with all of her attacks.
Keith also noting that the newly promoted model is unable to make attacks as well. So also no kills from her.
Does manage to eliminate an Incubi and charge on the Blood Witch that moved across the wall. Does not hit without gang with either her horns or her sword.
Blood Razor, yeah.
Blood Razor. There you go. It's not an exceptional turn for those Blood Witches this time, it looks like. Only able to eliminate an Incubi. Set defense plus Iron Zeal has kept those Legionnaires pretty safe. Derek Wraith activates next, moves up behind the wall, and unleashes a little Death Ride to begin maneuvering those Bane Thralls into position. Now, those Bane Thralls are still stuck pretty well behind that Scalar Cloud, and that's going to certainly prove to be a problem. I think overall for the amount of charges that Keith's going to be able to pull off in the center line, although he's got plenty of Bane Thralls that have good charge lanes to those Legionnaires on the far right of Brandon's flank.
I want to briefly correct myself here on Lichward Asphyxia's feat. He can bring back the living models as well. I was thinking of the wrong thing, I'm afraid. But he now has plenty of models to Spectral Legion if he wishes to get closer to the action, which may or may not be the case, as we've stated, because of the Ravagors.
Tartarus activates, curses the Legionnaires, and then declares a charge against the far Legionnaire. And with 11 inches from the charge, quick check of the charge lane, and Tartarus is in a nice position to unleash some pretty decent attacks. The first charge target hits thanks to the curse. Faralore is also hit. Standard hits, and the other one hits, and then he rolls against his Blood Witch and misses auspiciously.
Yeah, that was quite convenient.
19 does not eliminate a Legionnaire. So, Unyielding coming into play here from Callus.
It's a nice stack of defensive abilities.
So Tartarus is unable to crack his first target. Manages to eliminate his second target, however.
Yeah, I'm sure that Keith really was counting on Tartarus to deal some damage, because that is not a solo you commit lightly.
And then eliminates the Standard Bearer as well. 22 against Faralore does nothing thanks to Unyielding, Iron Zeal, and defensive line, since Threshers are all simultaneous.
Yep. Those near Callus are going to be even more difficult to take out than the ones we were talking about earlier over on the flank.
Tartarus is certainly in a poor position at this point now. I don't think that he'll be making it to our next round, but you never know. Threat priority is certainly something to consider. We now see some Banes being made thanks to Tartarus' casualties at this point.
And it's always interesting to see what people choose to do with Tartarus. We've got one Bane Knight and one Bane Thrall, one of each. Or are they both Thralls? No.
They look to be
Both
Thralls.
Yep, two Bane Thralls. So he leaves that Bane Knight unit at a flagging 2 members, but gets the Bane Thrall unit even bigger than it was before.
It's probably the right play in this situation when you consider that the Bane Knights had already activated, but the Bane Thralls had not. He's now got that unit heftier in terms of size and scope, and they're still going to benefit from the curse. Keith notes that he did not measure that charge from the newly created Bane Thrall, and therefore will not get the charge bonus. Once again, another excellent show of sportsmanship from Keith.
Well, interesting in this case, where a charge is both a blessing and a curse, thanks to good old set defense.
At arm 22, yeah, what do you do there? What do you do when you're looking at Matt? Well, with curse though.
With curse.
With curse,
good point.
The charge is probably more preferable. But yeah, again, when you're looking at Crixian mats of 6, and even with Weapon Master against arm 22, Def 14, arm 22 is certainly going to cause you some consternation. So first charge attack misses on a 13. Second charge attack hits and does manage to eliminate the charge target with 4 dice on damage. Second attack hits because it is not a charge attack anymore. And 22 bounces thanks to Unyielding, Iron Zeal, and set and defensive line.
Now, one of the things that Brandon's got to be thinking about at this point is the position of those enemy models with regard to AoEs. He's got an AoE-oriented army with all those Ravagore attacks, and then also with Callus's Eruption spell. So now that those Bane Thralls have brought themselves close together, what is he going to do?
Certainly eliminating the Bane Thralls at this point are probably the biggest threat. You're right, he's got a lot of really great clusters there, and 3 Ravagores that are fully healthed up and untouched. So Brandon, I think, is, you know, if I was in Brandon's situation, I would always lament the loss of my Legionnaires, but they did their job. They've held up the Crixian forces in advance. They protected his key pieces. And, you know, we're going to see probably a Shredder next turn to get some tenacity out there, would be my guess. Although a Harrier with Callus is never a bad choice for True Strike, or even a Stinger potentially for Bushwhack, as those Crixian forces kind of move in, being able to fire first and move back, could be the trick that wins the game. Asphyxius has advanced up again and put himself on the hill, sitting on all of his focus, it looks like.
Yeah, he's thinking about those Ravagores, but he's not going to let them stop him from getting into position to feat next turn.
The Bile Thralls activate in advance and run to try to bring themselves into position. The Bone Jack moves up and takes a point for moving through one of those Scather Clouds.
Yeah.
Or, sorry, not clouds, AoEs. Now you've got me doing it.
Sorry about that. Even though Bonejacks don't have amazing damage grids and certainly don't have amazing armor, 1 point of damage is hardly going to bother that Defiler, because even if it is in the right column, it's not. There's no chance whatsoever that he's going to lose an Arc Node that way.
And it...
Keith's Standard Bearer not staying in place because of the hill, but just using a Blood Witch to show where the model is actually located.
Vengeance triggers on start of Brandon's turn, hits both and crits fires, and then does manage to crack armor both times. However, 2 tough rolls mean that those Bane Thralls are knocked down, and one of whom is on fire. Attack against Tartarus from Feralor hits and and destroys Tartarus.
That was a good roll.
That was an excellent roll on his part. And Tartarus is now removed before the turn even really begins. Huge swing, in my opinion, for Brandon's turn here. He doesn't have to deal with Tartarus. He still gets an activation from Feralor and the Legionnaires. I would call that definitely worth a head scratching from Keith.
But it does appear that both of our competitors are having some pretty phenomenal luck. Keith just made 2 or 3 tough rolls in a row.
Yep.
And then Brandon made an amazing damage roll against Tartarus.
No, it's certainly part of a player's skill and ability to be able to mitigate luck. Luck is certainly a factor. Dice are factors. Still, as the start of this round, No player has scored control points. The flag is very clean now.
The flag is indeed clean, but the models able to do anything about the flag are far from it. Even with a run, neither Callus nor Asphyxious is going to be able to claim a control point from the flag.
Brandon considering his turn now. You see the finger tap happening again. Doing some quick calculations, trying to figure out what his best move is here. Brandon asking some pretty good questions about Asphyxious' feet turn, fully expecting probably to see that next turn at this point, given Asphyxious' position and the fact that the game is getting into its later stages.
I think he's right to expect Spectral Legion on the following turn. It is in a position where Asphyxious can get close enough to the Ravagors to really do some damage with revived Banes.
So we're looking at round 4. Brandon, has to be a little cautious here. He doesn't want to give up any control points at this point. So moving back with those Ravagors, well, maybe the smart option in terms of preserving his force might not be the right option for the long game, because Asphyxious is certainly in a position to dominate if he doesn't keep the pressure on. He's lost enough Legionnaires at this point and Hex Hunters that he can't continue to stall out, so he's going to need a big turn here. And starting with Tartarus, I think that he's got the potential to have the big turn, but it'll be interesting to see what he does. Taking advantage of those knocked down Bane Thralls so they can't take free strikes, he repositions his Legionnaires, avoiding free strikes from the one that's still standing up.
Now, both of these players had a very interesting road to this game. This has been a 2-day event, with the first few rounds of the Iron Gauntlet event being held a couple days ago, and now the finals match is held today. Not just this very final match, the championship, but previous rounds that led to these being the only undefeated players remaining in this first Iron Gauntlet event. We did have a lot of very broad armies to look at and some interesting player choices. To get here, Brandon, in his previous match, to get to the very final table, Brandon played against Walter Langendorf, who was fielding Balder the Stone Soul and Captain Victoria Haley. So again, with the one War Machine, one Hordes method, while Keith's opponent, his final opponent before this match, was James Russell, who brought Master Necrotech Mortenebra and Lord Arcanist Ossian. So both War Machine armies, but very different ones. One that focused heavily on getting a bunch of jacks, presumably to go kill opposing war beasts, and one that was focused more on a mix of stuff and a good ranged game.
A little bit of laughter happening at the table as they realize that the Pistol Wraith that has been behind the forest the whole game has yet to actually do anything from behind the forest the whole game. So, the Pistol Wraith is just waiting for its moment to strike out and deal some death chill or some kind of damage to those Ravagors.
Well, it did take him quite a while to get there. He had to go through a bunch of models on one turn and get up onto the edge of the hill and then go forward and into the midst of some other dudes, but there he is. He's ready now.
He has got both weapons drawn and is prepared to ambush through that forest, so there you go. The Legionnaires had actually a pretty decent turn. Despite their limited numbers, they were able to eliminate a couple of Bane Knights, as well as knock down another Bane Thrall that Tuft, as well as one other model. So the Hex Hunters continue to not rally after a failed command roll, so they are clearly out of the fight permanently at this point.
Keith looking pretty pleased with that result.
That is certainly what you want to see at that point. He's removed that unit from the game for over half the rounds at this point now. The Ravagor activates next and shifts over. You hear that applause over the sound. Also, several other events are wrapping up right now, so Plenty of action happening at Lock and Load 2013. Lots of excitement, and you know, the Iron Gauntlet qualifier final round, the first one ever. Certainly one of the major milestone events for this year. But we've got plenty of action happening right now, and plenty of play still going on. So it's a very exciting and energetic situation right now. That Ravagore that activates takes a nice shot at a cluster of Crixian troops, eliminates the Blood Witch that is the primary target.
Now, the way I see it, Brandon's really got two choices right now. He can keep fighting for that zone by dedicating troops to it, possibly even a Ravagore, and knowing that they're going to get hit with Spectral Legion. Or he could fall back a bit and keep those resources safe from the feet for another round, but know that it's probable that Keith will get a control point.
Well, probable, but likely 2. And 2 is a very major swing. But if it brings Asphyxious into threat range, there's certainly a possibility.
Yeah, into threat range of 3 Ravagores is kind of a dangerous spot to be.
Even with all your focus on you, for sure. Luckily for Keith, you know, you can't get triple fired. Once you get fire once, it doesn't get better.
All right.
So just as much of a likelihood of it going out, but still, POW 12 on a focus stripped Asphyxious is going to cause anyone some concern. Brandon considering now what his next move is going to be. That first shot from the Ravagore did some decent damage and dropped that Scather Cloud in a way that will hopefully protect it from most of the remaining Crixian troops, but Spectral Legion, of course, if it's brought that way, is going to ignore all damage. Well, those models are on the table in their ghostly state.
Well, and those Bile Thralls are now close enough to get rid of those Hex Hunters if Keith chooses to do so. It's probably the right call, even though they're still fleeing.
Brandon, looking intently at the board, considering his next moves, still has a spawning vessel left to go, and Lesser I expect to be coming out this turn. He's actually whispering to himself whether he casts Eruption again or not.
It would give him another area of automatic damage. If he could set up that line just right, at just the right distance, perhaps he can keep the zone, keep Keith from getting any control points, and save his troops from the feet, from Spectral Legion.
It's a lot of really precise and carefully coordinated action to be able to pull that off. And obviously, as you well know, being a veteran of the game and of events like this one, that's always a difficult thing to do in the heat of the moment. You know, we have the advantage of being impartial, of not having the game on the line, of things happening before us. We get to sit back, see the whole table from very many different views. So, you know, a mark of a player is how well he handles the adversity that comes his way in the heat of the moment, with snap decisions, with the clock running down against you. It's always a challenge, and you know, it's a great fun to be able to watch these players live as they make these decisions, as they try to overcome and triumph in the Iron Gauntlet.
Well, and it's also a difficult thing to do. Asphyxious is most likely going to charge 9 inches and then place those models within 3 inches, so not completely within 3, so edge to edge. So you've got quite a bit of threat range on there. Then you add in the charge of a Bane Knight, getting the AoEs of the Scathers and the Eruption into just the right place would be next to impossible. I'm not sure it is possible with the distances that we have on the board right now.
No, I mean, at best, if Brandon wants to try to completely avoid the feat and keep those Ravagores safe, he's likely going to have to put a shield in front of them to stop, because obviously Ghostly, well, it ignores free strikes and allows them to ignore obstructions and rough terrain doesn't allow them to move through opposing models. So if he puts up a wall of meat in front of them, he can hopefully protect his important pieces. But with his massive amounts of casualties that both sides have taken, he just lacks that wall, that expendable troop line with the Legionnaires so depleted at this point, and the Hex Hunters continuing to run.
And this is something that I personally consider the mark of a good player. Brandon is attacking with the Nis Grunts that help hold the spawning vessel, trying to kill a Bane Knight with them. And he did hit, but was unable to destroy that Bane Knight. So, but it's always worth a try. Never forget about your abilities, or never leave a guy not making an action, not making an attack if he can. Speaking of which, I think that possibly future turns into the game we'll see Keith, now that Asphyxious is closer to the action, doing the same with him, using his action to put down the soul-collecting capabilities of his weapon De Immortis. You always want to use every weapon at your disposal. Here we see this Harrier is moving forward and taking out some enemies. The choice Brandon made, giving True Strike to Callus temporarily, but probably not for long, with where he chose to end the Harrier's turn well into the action. A second Ravagore is now trying to stand on that hill and leaning a little bit, so Brandon turns it around, explaining, however, that it is facing Keith's army. He boosts an attack roll at the middle model and another cluster of Crixian troops. It hits easily, and the 3 models are under the AoE, about to take some damage. The tough roll does not save this Bane Thrall. And
the Bloodhang is finally also removed as a casualty.
So much attrition. We did mention that it was likely to be very much an attrition game with lots of death, and that has certainly proved true.
You know, at this point, though, in terms of straight attrition values, Brandon is ahead. He has all 3 of his heavy war beasts, his Ravagores, completely untouched at this point. Likely not going to stay that way after Keith's next turn. However, he does have a decent lead at this point.
Well, I'd love to agree with you 100% on that, because it certainly looks true. But we've got 1 feat used and 1 feat still held on. And Spectral Legion is a nasty one. Brandon's gotten his attrition advantage back from bringing out Incubi, giving them +2 for defense for a turn, attacking with them. And Keith has not yet used the amazing attrition advantage that is Spectral Legion.
So the Succubus actually advanced up and used her ability to allow the Ravagore to benefit from its Animus without using Fury. He then advanced the Ravagore over. Looks like he's going to use the Ravagore to hopefully block some of the Spectral Legion, or take the Spectral Legion feat that he's got to expect next turn.
Looks like. Speaking of the Succubus, the support models on Brandon's side of the table have been real stars, I think. From the subtle abilities of the Succubus, saving him some Fury and giving him some efficiency where he needs it on his War Beasts. And then the Shepherds, of course, rock stars as always, making sure that Fury management is easier to do than it would normally be. And even the Spell Martyr. That first eruption was in a great spot at a great time and really helped set up that 4 AoE blocking turn, that wall of auto damage. So those little support models may not seem like much, but they are doing their jobs.
Again, we see some great rolling from Keith in terms of his tough rolls. The 2 Bane Thralls that were caught in that AoE both took damage from boosted damage rolls, but were able to make their tough, so they are knocked down, but they are not going out for the count still. Both are on fire now, so we will get to see if that will come into play later. But you know, that's a big boon for Keith at this point to keep those models in the game. That Ravagore new position certainly does not protect it against Asphyxia Sword of the Feet. It simply keeps it in the zone to hopefully try and prevent Keith from earning some points. However, depending on how Keith determines to use Asphyxious next turn and what his goals are for the Spectral Legion, he could, I believe, score 2 control points and put himself ahead.
It's certainly possible. We do have a 0-0 control point game still, and that getting those 5 points is definitely a viable way to win. So it'll be interesting to see if that's the direction that Keith tries to take his feet, or if possibly he waits, since there's not quite as much that he can do with it with just one key model in range.
All right, so Brandon decides to use Eruption again. He misses his attack. Deviation is decent and puts the Eruption damage right next to that Scather. So he's got a nice little wall blocking the path to his 2 Ravagores next to that hill. And Callus wisely advances up to the hill to stay out of hopefully potential assassination range. You know, another interesting thing to note about our players is that Brandon actually won 2 of his 4 games by control points, by scenario, whereas Keith only won a single game by control points. So
well, certainly a factor there is which lists they're playing. Some of our other players who made it into the top 8 rounds, the top 8 players, we've got some who didn't win a single game by control points, and others who nearly every game they won was through that method. So either direction is definitely a viable option for how to win a game in Iron Gauntlet.
And once again, Keith's luck with those Bane Thralls that were knocked down and on fire continues, making multiple tough rolls, and now having fire on both of them go out. So those Bane Thralls are just indestructible at this point through some amazing luck and rolls. Vengeance move from the Bane Knight, the last remaining Bane Knight, I believe, manages to not actually connect with its target, which looked to be one of the handlers.
Yep. The handler that tried to kill him, potentially.
Well, it does make sense when you have an ability called Vengeance that you strike back against those who try to do you harm. So Keith now considering what he's going to do with the rest of his turn after a pretty decent start in terms of keeping those Bane Thralls alive. However, Eruption, several Scather Clouds again. Brandon using his abilities to board control to great effect to try to slow down Keith's progress.
It's also interesting to note that Death Ripper Wreck marker is in a pretty good spot for Brandon, not so much for Keith.
So we see Saxon Auric actually charging Dara Wraith in the back.
Charging the Harrier, I believe.
Charging the Harrier, excuse me. I saw Dara Wraith, the Harrier, hiding behind. Massive amounts of dice thanks to Saxon Auric's anti-hordes abilities. Skinning Knife comes up next. Does hit. Takes a Fury away because the Harrier was full. POW 8 does 1 point of damage to the 3.
So Harrier's still around. I'm not sure. I didn't hear if any of the aspects were fully crippled.
Body is out on the Harrier, but
mind and spirit are still around.
Not by much, though. From this angle, it looks like he's got about 4 boxes left. Oh, that Pistol Wraith is finally deciding to join the party. Floating effortlessly through the trees and targeting the Succubi. Does connect to the Succubi. POW 12 eliminates it.
Yeah, those Wraith
fires on
pistols.
the Shepherd next. And eliminates her as well. So 2 support still is down, 2 body tokens on the Pistol Wraith, but that Pistol Wraith is corporeal now.
Those Wraithlock pistols are pretty impressive. The Pistol Wraith has a Rat 7, which is very solid, and with only range 10, but with POW 12, it's pretty much guaranteed to take out a support solo. Something like the Succubus might get away with getting hit by a POW 10 here and there, but a POW 12 is usually going to do the trick. So both the Succubus and the Shepherd, those support solos I was just praising for their support capability, both now out of the picture.
Finally removed, and with 2 soul tokens on him now, the Pistol Wraith represents a pretty significant threat.
Absolutely.
That Brandon is going to have to decide, does he divert resources to eliminate it while it's still corporeal, or does he allow it to go incorporeal and potentially threaten Callus? With the boosting ability those souls give it, it's certainly able to maybe not finish Callus off, but put a huge dent into him if given the opportunity.
My answer is yes. You need to deal with that Pistol Wraith, because boosted POW 12s, that's going to deal some damage to even the Ravagors. So it's worth taking him out if the opportunity arises.
Well, and the opportunity is not going to get much better than this, considering that the Hex Hunters have pretty much become a non-issue in this battle. You know, and unless Callus wants to move up and either try to eliminate the Pistol Wraiths themselves in hand-to-hand, which is probably not advisable given the position of the Crixian forces, or try another Eruption attack, which is thus far, despite Brandon and Keith's kind of joking about its inability to hit, I believe has been pretty influential on this game every time it's come out.
Yeah, the AoEs being in place have been just as important as the initial damage rolls.
Some decisions being made here. Asphyxius measures his control area. We can see the time left on the clock here. Both players, out of their 60-minute death clocks, are now down to just little over 15 for Keith and a little under 15 for Brandon. So the timing is definitely going to become a factor at this point, with neither player really in a position to threaten the other with an assassination run and no control points.
Interesting. I did not expect Keith to devote Asphyxius to that Harrier. I could have sworn he was going to go for the feat. Oh, he is still going for the feat. And domination of the zone.
No,
But looks like he's taking more of a attrition approach still, rather than control point approach quite yet, although he may get one. But Asphyxius is using that 3-inch placement effect to place the models he can into some of the clouds, and that way they won't be moving into them. They're in them already.
Well, and again, Spectral Legion prevents damage in general, so those models are immune to the Scather and the Eruption effect. So,
Right.
the only thing that you know, line of sight obviously is an issue, and that positioning does solve that problem, being in the cloud rather than behind it. You know, at this point, you've got Tartarus on the board. You've got several heavy war beasts, though. What's your next move here? I mean, what do you prioritize? Obviously, removing those Ravagors is important, but the Ravagors aren't pushovers. They have a decent number of damage boxes, being heavy war beasts, and I think there's certainly going to be some careful consideration in terms of charge lanes and in terms of what Keith is trying to accomplish here.
Well, I think that's where the mix comes in. Keith is putting out Tartarus, of course, but then some Bane Knights, some Bane Thralls, and has them kind of layered. If Tartarus curses the right target, then you get the Bane Thralls in to get the Dark Shroud cooking, then the Bane Knights who have the reach and who are also weapon masters. You can really do some damage to the Ravagors. My guess is that he's going to shoot for taking out 2 Ravagors. Oh, and Keith is going for the Dominate. He's moved Asphyxius via the teleport spell and placed him into the zone after all.
And in cover and on a hill. So Asphyxius is well defended against retaliation at this point.
Yeah, defense 21 from ranged and magic at this point. And he still has some of his focus left, so even his armor's not low either.
Tartarus declares a charge against Faralore and the Legionnaires to get as many models as possible in his Thresher attack. Needs to declare his curse, and curses the far Ravagore that is still just a wooden marker on the hill. Eliminates the Bane Thrall that was his charge target in order to bring the maximum amount within Thresher range.
Trying to get around the set defense ability once again.
Does manage to eliminate both in the Thresher range. Brings 2 more Banes back. So traded 1 Bane to get another one. And he's now up 1, which is a great boon for Keith. So the real Bane Thrall unit activates next. And they get a charge order against the Ravagore. That Ravagore is not cursed, but with Dark Shroud and only defense 11, it's likely that several of these attacks are going to take a big chunk out of it, if not eliminate it fully. It will all come down to dice, I think, on that effect. Lacking reach, obviously. Keith's options are somewhat limited, thanks to Feralor still being in the way, as well as that Eruption.
But he does have 3 of those Bane Thralls on the Ravagore, as well as an additional one on Feralor himself.
Attack on Feralor misses thanks to set defense. 5 off on his damage roll. Does 10 to the 4. That is a good roll to start this this attack sequence off.
Both players being a bit more mindful of the clock at this point. When every second counts.
$12. Eliminates the Ravagore with 3 shots, so great rolling by Keith. Brandon checks his control, or checks the pot to see if he can get a corpse token for it, and he can. So that'll put another one in there. That's going to be pretty critical as his War Beasts start to drop in order to keep Callus at least stocked with some fury overall. Although Hyper Regeneration does help with that a little bit when you have to start cutting, because you can cut a bit and know you'll at least get 1 back, maybe 3.
True.
So
The more reliable method, though, as you said, is definitely the lesser War Beasts that could be generated here.
So we see an interesting aspect coming into play in terms of Keith's army list, and specifically Asphyxious' feat, in that he started his turn at above 15 minutes. He's now down to 10. So when you have a lot of models to move and a lot of activations to do, a lot of dice to roll, it certainly eats into your time. And at this point, it's going to become a factor.
And with the time getting close, he's switching it for every time that damage needs to be marked, and still the time is going down that quickly.
It's one of those things, as you watch it, it seems like time just speeds up the closer you get to that 0 mark, and as a player, that's really when training and discipline come into it. Not rushing and making sure that you're not making mistakes on those critical turns.
Well, and part of it, too, is to treat every turn like the timer matters.
Quick check to see if he was able to get within charge range.
That is a pretty difficult
And it
angle.
was,
I would have asked for a measurement as well, I believe.
It was an illegal charge, so that will just be a fail because Keith does not want to take the time to back it up, it sounds like, according to our Judge Hartland, who said that was possible. So it does 7 to the 5 on the cursed Ravagore. Another charge.
Oh, another high roll.
So 14 more damage to the Ravagore. Keith was hopeful that that would eliminate it, but it does not. The Ravagore remains alive.
Here we get a shot of what exactly is
Close
damaged.
up of what's going on.
Or at least of a hand.
Or at least of a hand damaging the card itself. There we go. And now the Ravagore has...
2 circles of body remaining.
I believe the last attack actually eliminated those 2 boxes, so that Ravagore is now dead. So we're down 2 Ravagores. Asphyxious' feat doing what it does best here, and giving Keith back a pretty big swing in terms of the attrition game that we talked about.
Now, I am shocked, I have to say, that Dark Wraith did not use Death Ride. that would have made at least one more charge possible, possibly another one or two.
We see
He
Darg,
must have some other purpose.
we see Darg Wraith moving over into that zone, and Death riding. He says he only cares about that Bile Thrall there.
Try and take out a Nisgrunt from the spawning vessel or two.
Well, you know, the Spectral Legion models that are back don't care. They're going to be gone next turn anyway.
They don't really care. Maybe some of the fleeing Hex Hunters might bite the dust.
So we see 16 bouncing because of unyielding on the last remaining Legionnaire. But the two Acolytes are removed.
And we now have control points. Keith declares that he's ending his turn and rightfully claims the 2 control points for dominating the zone with his Warcaster.
You'll see.
And though we were concerned earlier about Ravagors killing Asphyxious at defense 21 and only 1 Ravagor left, that is probably not going to be a factor.
The last Legionnaire dies to corrosion, so after surviving all of that, it gets eaten away by a little bit of acid, and that is the end of that unit. We've got, I believe that will give Brandon, though, three corpse tokens on his spawning vessel again, so we're going to see another lesser coming out. Keith is down to 7 minutes and 5 seconds on his clock, so that was a big turn, and it definitely ate up a lot of time. But it's put Brandon significantly on the back foot. Look at all the Bane Thralls that we now have on the table again. We've got a Pistol Wraith that's loaded with 2 soul tokens that is corporeal, but 2 heavy war beasts down. That's certainly going to be difficult. Like, Brandon needs to figure out something here. He's got to come up with a plan to bring this game back into his favor and not allow Asphyxious to dominate that zone again, which means at least throwing away 1 model into that meat grinder at best.
It does look like he may be close enough to grab 1 control point off of the flag with Callus. But is there enough of an army remaining for him to keep Keith from gaining more dominate control points from the zone?
Yeah, throwing a model in one at a time with that many Bane Thralls, I think he can stop him this turn, but if he doesn't fully commit in some meaningful way, I think Keith has enough models left on the table now, thanks to Tartarus coming back and bringing back several more Bane Thralls from his Thresher attacks, to prevent Brandon from making any kind of meaningful contesting of that zone without concerted effort. Now,
well, and we were talking earlier about time and the clocks, but it's worth noting that this is round 5, I believe. So you're talking about a game that already has gone on much longer than most. They're really just throwing punches at each other and knocking things down. But in many cases, for them to get back up, stuff like Unyielding, stuff like Tough, stuff like the Spawning Vessel, or the Feats, all of these things are turning this into such a slugfest.
Brandon is definitely taking his time and considering he's doing the smart thing here right now and utilizing his greater amount of time currently than Keith to not make a mistake. He's being careful. Of course, he's got to balance that against the fact that he's going to be under 10 minutes here, and it's going to become a game of time even if he tries to slow down the control points. So, you know, careful consideration is important, but also making decisive decisions and pushing forward is also going to be a hallmark, I think, of our first Iron Gauntlet qualifier champion here at Lock and Load 2013. Callus is looking at a charge right now to pull off Flashing Blade to kill a bunch of those Bane Thralls. Brandon did note, though, that when Callus charges and Flashing Blades in range of a model like Asphyxious, that doesn't usually end well. And if you've ever read the Domination fluff, you know that to be true as well.
Yep. It is a viable tactic, though. If he brings out a lesser primarily for transferring damage, and he's got the Ravagor, sorry, And he takes out enough of the Banes, who also no longer have access to Curse. All of that put together means it might be a viable strategy. Certainly one of only a few options remaining to him, I would say.
Yeah, it's difficult, though, at this point when you've been playing the attrition game so well and for so long to snap back to a different mindset, to change plans midstream, even when it may be the best choice. That can often be very disconcerting and difficult.
It can definitely. It can be a tough switch to make, but he'd made it before putting out a Shredder, though. So he will not have tenacity on Callus for even better defense and armor.
So he misses his charge attack and knocks over the Ravagore on the hill. Hits with his first Flashing Blade attack, though. And three Bane Thralls die to Flashing Blade. One is set on fire from Callus's weapon Hellbrand from Flame Burst. And then Callus camps on 5.
Now, between Unconquerable, the unyielding ability that we've mentioned a bunch of times, giving +2 arm to models that are engaging in his army, he does also have pretty decent armor to begin with.
Yeah, between his decent def and his exceptional armor, combined with unyielding, there's certainly a decent chance with 5 transfers potentially that he's going to be able to survive Iron Lich's or Lich Lord Asphyxious' retaliation.
And here comes that Shredder. The only unfortunate part with this method, maybe a Shredder. The only unfortunate part with the maybe Shredder method is that the Shredder could potentially get killed before damage is transferred to it. So I'm curious to see where he's going to wind up putting it, since it'll have to be a little closer this way than the alternate way. And there are those Acolytes, once again, trying to destroy a Bane Knight. Though it's always worth doing, in my opinion. Time is of the essence.
You cannot, yes, you certainly have time running on the clock, and you also have no guarantee that they're going to be able to pull off that amazing roll to make the thing happen. So the Shredder actually rabids and goes after Darg Wraith.
Yeah, I didn't see that coming.
Oh no, I'm sorry. The Shredder did not actually. The Shredder also cast Tenacity on Callus.
Okay, he did cast Tenacity.
So only one attack against
without
Wraith.
Rabbit.
Without Rabbit.
Okay. Or walked up with Rabbit. Walked up with Rabbit, I think. Let's go with that.
That's definitely what I would do in that situation. I believe that Brandon would probably make the same call. Unfortunately for him, it looks like Darg Wraith really didn't mind having the Shredder nibble at his undead horse.
We do apologize that every now and then we make a bit of a mistake. We're interpreting what's going on a little and trying to give you the best information we can.
The Hex Hunters finally rally with a successful command check, and our players were kind of tongue-in-cheek cheering at the fact that they had decided to rejoin the fight. At this point, with so few models left on the table, that could be really important.
On round 6, they'll be ready to fight. They'll be back in the action.
If Callus can make it that through Keith's turn, I'm telling you, it could matter. 3 models at this point in the game with this many models.
Here comes the Ravagore.
Here comes the Ravagore.
Rather than hanging back as a transfer battery and using his prodigious ranged capabilities, he is going to try and take out more models by moving up.
So, tough roll sees the Bane Thrall leader destroyed as he fails it.
Well, that's 2 axes for the price of 1,
and a Scather right in front of Callus. So, Not a bad shot position. Although the Ravagore is really close to be in threat range as well, and
And I expected this one pretty soon. Keith is curious about, I think Keith is curious about his exact charge ranges with where other models are, with where that Scather is, with where that wreck marker is, and what that's going to mean for the following turn.
we see the Shepherd bravely running straight forward and interposing herself through one of the charge lanes that Asphyxious has to the Ravagore. Well, she has decent defense, her 1 damage box, and almost non-existent armor.
And fire works for once.
And probably at a time when, to be honest, Brandon didn't want it to. That opens up a decent charge lane to Callus. So this is going to be a very interesting turn.
And we are still in a situation of 0 control points Brandon, 2 control points Keith. As we're at the bottom of the 5th round, I believe, we are getting pretty far along for such low control point scores. I'm not anticipating a control point victory with the position of these this Warcaster and this Warlock. Looking directly across the zone at each other with a pile of Focus or Fury, respectively.
So you question Saxon Oric's usefulness on his reconnaissance ability given the table position, but now Saxon Oric has again made himself known by killing another lesser war beast thanks to Dismember and his 2 melee weapons. So
yeah,
freeing up Dara Graith to go after that Shepherd that was in the way, overall, and then getting to cast a spell thanks to Battle Wizard.
While the board wasn't ideal for Saxon Oric, the opponent sure was. Having all of those great anti-hordes capabilities at your fingertips is very helpful.
See the Defiler moving up and spraying through the Ravagore. POW 12 gets a 22 on the dice roll to the 5.
Without a boost. That's pretty good.
Chipping away at the Callus's transfer abilities. Ravagore gets shot by the Pistol Wraith, who's loaded up with souls that wasn't handled last turn. 11 points to the 4. I think that Ravagore isn't even going to make it to the transfer at this point.
Well, and this brings up why I was wondering if he wouldn't hold the Ravagore back. Shooting in AoE in there somewhere, possibly right where it is, but staying away from some of these other models.
So we see a charge from the remaining Bane Thralls against the Ravagore. He does manage to get 2 in with avoiding that Scalar Cloud, which is pretty huge at this point. Last Bane Thrall runs. But interesting position there.
Right
at the
in
end,
front of
right in front of
Asphyxious' face. It's going to be tough to take him out with just magical attacks, and he doesn't want to teleport in right next to him. I am honestly not sure what exactly. Oh, and Keith is just playing the time game. That does make sense then. He's still got lots of focus on Asphyxious. He's still in that elevated in cover position, and he's got models that are in the way of Callus to keep Asphyxious safe. Callus also currently has no sources of fury.
Callus does have the benefit of, again, having hyper regeneration, which makes cutting for fury a little less of a huge concern. The Hex Hunters are back in the game, as Andrew Hartland pointed out. I don't know. It's a tough situation. Both players down to almost 4 minutes on the clock. Decisions have to be made quick, and they have to be made now. Keith patting his Pistol Wraith metaphorically on the head by saying that's the best he's ever done, and I would find it hard to disagree. That was a great 2 turns for the Pistol Wraith back-to-back.
Indeed. At this point, Keith has a luxury that Brandon doesn't, and that is in this Warcaster facing down a Warlock battle, even with hyper regeneration, there's no transfer targets over there. If Asphyxious hits Callus a few times, his usual means of avoiding that damage is not going to do the trick, whereas Asphyxious holding on to his focus points is going to stay difficult to remove from the game.
Well, luckily for Brandon, here comes the self-sacrifice from the Acolytes in order to fill up that pot and pop out another lesser.
And I'm sure that the plan is for that lesser to go after the intervening Bane Thrall. Got one corpse token, but not the second corpse token for the vessel.
That hurts. What at this point do you do? You've got Battle Wizard that Brandon's considering. How to thin out those Bane Thralls. Battle Wizard certainly is not a bad option here.
Well,
to thin out those Bane Thralls, or maybe try to eliminate that Pistol Wraith, although he's very well defended given his position in the...
I didn't notice when he cast it, but I believe that upkeep spell token next to Asphyxious is that Keith has recast Hellbound. So Asphyxious cannot be charged, and the area right around him is rough terrain.
So we see Eruption coming out again. So Eruption misses, but largely not an issue.
On a medium base, I believe he's too close to miss. They're checking it.
Brandon only has a minute left on the clock at this point, so he needs to make things happen. He casts another Eruption. Time is ticking down. Regardless of whether Brandon continues to go. So Brandon is shaking his hand and calling it due to time, as well as just being in a poor position. So a good sportsmanship move there.
Well, and he knows what's coming. He knows that next turn Asphyxious is going to be able to destroy Callus with no transfers. He just needed to get a tiny bit closer to make those Eruptions automatically hit against Asphyxious, and that would have been potentially a difference maker. It would have at least given him a chance to see what Callus could do against Asphyxious, but that would have required some pretty ludicrous die rolls, to be honest. It was a long shot.
It's true,
but
it was a long shot.
It was worth the attempt.
It's always worth going, all the way to the end. But then, when the writing's on the wall, doing the honorable thing and shaking hands, and kudos to our competitors. They played a great game. It was a bloody game. It was exciting to watch. Lots of death and destruction. I mean, look at how few models are left on that board right now, and think of how many we started with when the board was just filled with troops. And
think about how many models we created and then destroyed again.
That's true. We even added to the initial forces over and over again to remove them once more. So it was a fantastic game, very exciting. Congrats to both Brandon and to our champion for the first Iron Gauntlet qualifiers, Keith Christensen. Both these guys played an excellent game, and I'm sure we'll see them again at future qualifiers as they fight their way on the road to become hopefully contestants in 2014 Lock and Load's Iron Gauntlet Finals event, and to be claimed the Iron Gauntlet World Champion.
I'm curious what you think, Will, but I've actually been even more impressed with this format than I thought I would be. We've seen some great army lists from such a broad, diverse possibility of Warcasters and Warlocks, and I really like what I've seen so far.
Yeah, going through the competitors' lists and the choices that they made, the ability to choose cross-faction, to branch out, to bring different tools to the table has really led to an entirely different feel for this event. And I mean, just in our competitors who made it to the final table, between Fiora, Protector of the Flame, and Callus, Wrath of Everblight, those things are definitely amazing, as well as all of the opponents that we're seeing. I'm very excited very excited by this format. I can't wait to see which competitors show up at the next qualifier, which will be held at Gen Con upcoming this August.
Yep, we will see you there. I just got to figure out now how I can get to participate in our Gen Con qualifier.
I don't think we're going to let that happen. We like you too much. Well, from DC and myself, thank you very much for joining us. It's been an exciting time. We've got plenty more action coming this way from Lock and Load 2013, including the closing ceremonies. But for everyone around the world who's not here with us, we thank you very much for watching and hope you had as much fun as we did commentating for you and walking you through this fantastic game.